Welcome to the Fat Dad Fishing Show podcast, the podcast aimed at helping saltwater fishermen catch more fish in less time and have a better on-the-water experience. My name is Rich. I'm the host of the show, and after the overwhelming positive feedback from last week's podcast episode, we're taking another trip back in time this week. We're plunging back into the archives from a 2021 live stream to revisit the conversation I had with Dan Mancari, co-host of the Tide Chasers podcast, to talk about his tactics for targeting fluke from shore. As with last week, I ask you to excuse the less than perfect audio and the inexperience that I show as an interviewer, but despite all that, it was a great conversation. So kick back, relax, and take it all in. Tonight, I am doing on this live stream a discussion with a gentleman that I think you should all know. And if you don't, you really need to get to know. His name is Dan Mancari. He is the co-host of the Tide Chasers podcast. Welcome, Dan.
How you doing, man?
Live stream. And we're going to be talking tonight all about catching flounder from shore. And for the subscribers of this channel, flounder is a big topic. I did a poll on the site, Dan, and I asked, what other things do you want to hear about? And there were some sheep's head, and the rest were saying, no, stick with flounder. So very excited to have you on.
Who could blame them, man? They're great. They're great topics. I love both those fish. They're probably my two favorite fish to catch personally. So I really dig them. But flounder, I've loved flounder a little bit longer than the sheep's head. So,
you know, I've caught sheep's head by accident. I have never caught one on purpose, although I've tried. But flounder, man, that's my game. But to be honest with you, I'm like, I would say 90% of the people out there, I struggle. I think I know how to catch them from shore, but I struggle. And as a matter of fact, in my upbringing, I always thought that it was impossible to catch them from shore. I thought you had to be in a boat and you had to drift. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this tonight and to go into some details so that we can, hopefully get some of the folks that are watching onto more flounder, onto some better flounder, and we get the shore guys in on the action that some of the other folks, out on the boats and on the kayaks have been on, for the past few years, some pretty decent fishing. So actually, Dan, what I wanted to do is, first of all, let everyone know who you are. Again, co-host of Tide Chasers podcast, but Dan is actually a real multi-species guy, right? So if you've seen him on Instagram, it's DMancari18, I believe.
That's right.
Right. He is on a lot of different fish, freshwater, saltwater. So Dan, you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Man, I've just so my fishing life started when I was much younger. My mom was really the one that kind of got us into the fishing world because my dad worked overnights at General Motors. So my mom would be the one that would take us and get us into it, and it kind of evolved. And then there was a period of time where I stepped away from it. I met my wife, and then I bonded with her dad, and me bonding with my father-in-law was how I really got back and got back into the love of fishing again. It kind of started off pretty simple with him. We were doing a lot of crappie fishing, a lot of like panfish type stuff, bass and type stuff like that. And then it just evolved from there. And then I got obsessed, and it got to the point where I made it a goal of my own to, add 5 or 6 new species of fish every year that I felt like I mastered per se. And that's just how the whole multi-species thing took off. And I joke now I could be fishing for like salmon one day and redfish the next. You never know where I'm going to be at. So
that's not a bad place to be.
No, not at all.
Yeah, for me, I started off saltwater, and the only freshwater I really did growing up was when I was really young. We went to a pool that had a pond, and we would fish through the cracks of the dock, and we'd try to catch the snapping turtles, even though you could never pull them in. Yeah. And then, when I was in college, I couldn't get to the saltwater. I went to Bloomsburg, which is, in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. And it was trout fishing, trout and walleye, and that was it. But there's also the one that I really love looking at your pictures. It's the snakehead. Also, I would say you look like you've mastered it. There are a couple of guys on Instagram that have really got them dialed in, and you're one of them.
I wouldn't say I have anything mastered. You know what I'm saying? Like when it comes down to fishing, you could feel like you have things mastered, and then something different comes along and changes your whole game. we'll get into that later with the fluke fish and the flounder stuff, because I've really changed my repertoire there, and it's worked out. But I've been fishing for snakeheads for a long time, and I do pretty well. It gets to the point where I get a little burnout on them after the spring season's over myself, because I fish hard for them in the spring, and then I kind of let them loose when saltwater season comes around. So.
Right. So you're in the middle of the saltwater now, and it's fluke. I'm seeing fluke go across your Instagram page. Some really nice ones. I will say right now, you are having a better season than I am from shore. I mean, better season you on shore versus me on the kayak. I've had a good year, but it's not like it was last year, and it looks like you're having a year like I did last year in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, so it really has been on the last probably 4 weeks where, it's taken off for me. I've just been quietly getting out when I can, and beating the banks, and actually, really, it's all been from the surf. I made it a point this year that I wanted to clean up my surf game for fluke, and I think I've really been successful in what I've been trying to do there. So. I learned a couple of new techniques from a good friend of mine, Mark, at the end of the year last year, and I carried it over to this year, and so far so good. I have no complaints.
It's interesting you say that surf is where you're really getting it done, because a lot of surf fishermen, they never talk about flounder in the surf. You see on Facebook, what's running right now, and you never see in the Surfcaster forums or pages. You never see anyone say flounder, or you see one odd person every once in a while, but it's a great place to find them. So we'll talk about surf fishing for flounder, which is a whole different game. It's different than going out and chucking bait for stripers. It's actually, no, it's a little similar in a few ways, but it's different than just hauling out the bait, like, putting a bunker chunk on. But let's talk about, before we jump into that, let's talk about the gear. So you're fishing sod banks, you're fishing seawalls, you're fishing jetties, you're fishing the surf. What type of gear are you using?
So what I use in the back bay is a little bit different than what I'm using from the surf, because you're encountering a little bit different structure, right? So I use a little bit, and when I say a little bit heavier of a rod, I'm not using a heavier rod when I'm fishing bays, but where I fish in the bay, I'm fishing some pretty sticky stuff. So if I get snagged and I set a hook back there, I could break the rod that I'm using in the surf. So you kind of really got to adjust to where you're fishing. And some of the bay spots that I fish are pretty, they're pretty structure laden, I would say. A lot of rocks, a lot of variable drops and such. And so I use a little bit of a heavier rod back there, and what I'm using out front is completely different. I'm using like a medium light rod out front. So
that's interesting. So you're using the lighter rod out front.
Yeah.
Which is what most people would think is the opposite of the way that you should go.
Yeah.
And it's all based on the structure?
Well, it's based on structure and technique. So the stuff I'm doing out front is very technique driven. You kind of lend yourself to having almost like perfect conditions, because you're throwing super light jig heads, 1/4 ounce jig heads with a 6-inch jerk shad on it, and that's been the ticket, man. That's really been it. Sometimes I'll throw a little curly tail grub on there, but it's been all jerk shads for me this year, and that's one of my buddy's signature moves, and it's worked out for me too. So
yeah, those are tried and true. Before there was a John Skinner, there were jerk shads, and everyone was using them. They just weren't gulp. And I think that it's one of the least utilized types of soft plastics that you can use for fluke, or actually for anything. Everybody wants the big aggressive paddle tails or the curly tails for all that extra action, but it's not necessary in a lot of situations.
No, I've really adjusted the way I've fished over time, and I've gotten lighter and lighter and lighter. I just find myself getting lighter and lighter and lighter. Even I would say 2018 was my coming out party when it came to fluke fishing, because I really spent my whole summer doing it, and I was throwing, 1/2 ounce jig heads, 3/8 ounce jig heads. And I felt like I was throwing like the lightest possible thing then. And then I'm throwing 1/4 ounce jig heads in the surf catching fish. It's like, blows your mind. You know, like I bought a couple 1/8 ounce jig heads that I plan to try to see if I can maximize the action from these lures, you know? So
You got
really
me.
cool. You know,
I haven't gone that light. No.
Once you get to the point where you feel like you've got something figured out, then you try and tweak it and tweak it and tweak it all the way down to the minute details. So,
Right. So, what length rod are you using? Are you using like the 7.6 in both the front and the back?
so I use actually I use a 7 foot and in the front and the back. Now, I will say I would probably, I'm kind of searching for a rod that has similar action out front. That I want it to be a little bit longer, like maybe a 7.6, maybe a 7.10, something like that. But
Right.
just to load up a little bit better when I'm setting that hook on those light jig heads. But I'm using a 7 foot currently, and it's doing the trick. But I feel like I could use a little bit more length just to get a little better load on the rod. But beyond that, the 7 foot's been money both front and back.
Right. And you know, we'll talk about this in a little bit when we get into more of the tactics, but you're not hauling it, you know, incredible distances out front or back.
No.
So the length of the rod for the casting distance isn't necessarily the most important thing to you, unlike chucking baits, you know, when you're trying to hit that second sandbar.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to fluke fishing in the surf, like there are spots that I'm wading to where I'm catching fish behind me.
Right.
You know, they're all around you. So it just really depends on where the bait is and, you know, where the structure is, where the lip of the beach, all that good stuff. So, you know, what it comes down to is that you gotta play the field that you're on. You know, it's when it comes to sod banks and jetties and inlets, I fish those a little differently than I would out front. But yeah, it's fun, man. I mean, it's fun to really just kind of grow your game and really learn new tricks and just kind of watch what other people are doing out there. There's a lot of different people that are doing this a lot better than I am, and I've learned a little bit from all of them.
Right. I think that's always the best way to go. You know, it's the guys online that claim they know everything are the ones that know the least, and they're really good at catching fish one way.
Yeah.
You know, and the conditions have to be perfect, and you never see the reports but once a month, and they slammed them. Well, they were catching skunks a lot of times in between, and for me, and the goal for this channel is, you know, it's to avoid the skunk. It's to get something out of every minute that you're out on the water, and definitely talking to different people is going to help that out. Now, one thing I do want to ask, when we talk about terminal tackle, you use a specific brand.
I
right?
do. I do. Yeah. I use the eye strike jig heads personally. I you know, listen, I'm team eye strike, but I love the jigs. I was using them well before, you know, I was part of their team there. I don't believe a lot in the whole team thing and all that good stuff, but what they do as far as a brand goes, they're doing it right. And, you know, they do the conservation side of things right too. And, you know, they listen to their customers. But yeah, I use so part of the reason why I like the eye strike jig head is because you get a lot of bang for your buck when it comes down to it. So if you go to the stores around here and you try to find a 1/4 ounce jig head that's going to match the size of your bait on a 6-inch jerk shad, well, you're going to find something that's probably, you know, pretty minute, right? The great thing about the eye strike jig heads is they have a longer shank hook.
Yeah.
So if you use the redfish eye in the 1/4 ounce, or if you use the swim bait eye in the 1/4 ounce, you will find that those longer shank hooks actually match up amazingly to that jerk shad. And what I found is, you know, I was using some other stuff, some Gamakatsu hooks and things like that. That were also 1/4 ounce saltwater hooks, but the shank of the hook was just a little bit shorter, and I was getting short strikes. Once I switched, you know, back to this eye strike, and this was the eye strike thing. I've used them all year, but you know, in the past, those Gamakatsu hooks will get some short strikes because they're just a shorter shank hook. And with the eye strike ones, you get the big strong hook with the smaller head and the big eye, and it's just really money, man. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, I use eye strike quite often. And you know, when I'm using jig heads, right? But I do have the problem sometimes when I'm using bucktails or skirted jigs. Sometimes I don't look closely enough, and I end up, you know, spending $30. And then when I start opening the packs, I'm like, wow, this is short shank. No good. Can't use them for fluke. So you know, you got to go for something else. It's the longer shank that I think fits better to their mouth and the way that they eat.
Yeah, I've had great luck with them. I was using, before I got linked up with iStrike, I was using the VMC flat shads, and they were good. But even then, I was still getting a little bit shorter because they were just a tad shorter. The larger hooks on these smaller weighted jig heads is just where it's at, man. I wouldn't put anything else on the end of my line.
All right, so we got that covered. So let's talk two more things in gear before we move on to talking about the different spots and locations, which is probably going to be the bulk of the conversation because we're talking backwaters, jetties, surf, and everything like that. But the last part of gear that I'm wondering is what pound braid are you using? I assume you're using braid.
Yeah.
And what pound leader are you using, and is it mono or fluoro?
I'm using a 15-pound braid with a 12-pound fluorocarbon leader.
Okay.
I'll bounce it up to like a 15-pound fluoro leader in the bay where I'm fishing stickier stuff, but probably 10 or 12 out front and 12, 15 in the back.
It's very similar. Okay. It's similar to what I'm using.
Yeah, I'm using probably, a 3 foot to 40-inch leader, somewhere in there.
And do you always fish the just a single jig head?
Always. Even before my buddy Mark got me onto this jerk shad bite, I was on the single jig bite, and I can't take credit for it because another gentleman that I run into in my circles a lot, Chris McEntee, Sea Money Fishing.
Yeah.
We were talking back 2018, back when we both had really good years fluke fishing. We kind of shared some intel back and forth, and that was one thing we were both doing was the single jig or the single bucktail. It's really in my eyes, it's a keep it simple soup type thing. So, while you see a lot of people have success on the chicken rigs, the top and bottom rigs, with a teaser and things like that, I think that kind of fishing lends itself more towards like your boat fishing or your kayak fishing, whereas
right.
You're fishing vertical, you get a double presentation. Whereas if you're fishing from shore, you may not get the kind of presentation you're looking for out of something like that. From what I'm seeing anyway, it doesn't seem like it would make sense, right? Because you're dragging two baits along, whereas you're getting good presentation out of one of them, and the other one may not be. You don't know. Right. So I made the choice back then to do the single jig, and that's really what I've done almost my whole time I've fished for flounder ever. So
yeah, I think you make a good point. I personally don't use a teaser. I'll use a teaser when I'm casting from shore, sometimes when I'm tossing for striped bass, sometimes. But usually if I'm casting out, I'm not putting a teaser on there because you have the weight of the soft plastic up there, and that's interfering with the bottom jig. And really, in reality, that's the one that you want them to hit, right? On top of that, when you're bringing it in and when you're jigging vertically, you have a presentation up here and a presentation down there. That's a little easier.
Yeah.
But when you're pulling it in sideways, now you have one right in front of the other, and to me, it's too busy, less action, more drag on the bottom. So I actually don't use it. So when I go out on the kayak, I have one rod for tossing, and that has a single soft plastic on it. And then I have two rods rigged up for and that's when I use the teasers, bucktail or naked jig and the teaser.
Listen, from where I see it, there's a time and place for everything. I'm anal about presentation. That's one of the biggest things. That's one of the biggest things. Like, I want to be under the water seeing what the fish are seeing, because I want to see if I'm doing something wrong or if I have something rigged wrong. If my knot's not perfect. I visually, I like that everything lines up perfectly. And when you have something like that could be affecting the action of one another, I just can't see how it can be effective over a single jig that's going to be perfect every time if you're presenting the jig properly.
Right. I'm in full agreement on that. And the fact that you're going lighter just shows that's why, right? Yeah. Because the lighter you are, the more natural the presentation.
It's all about the action. If you're the heavier you go, the more you're taking away from the action of the lure you're presenting in front of that fish. Will you still catch fish dragging things along, dead sticking? Sure, it happens. Plenty of people do. However, if you're trying to maximize your efforts out there, that ain't the way to do it.
Right. I totally agree. So let's shift over
Sure.
and talk a little bit about the different spots. So again, we can't hit every spot. We don't have enough time. But so you have the shore base, you have the sod banks, you have the jetties, you have the seawalls, you have the surf. What's your preferred area to go out of all of those?
I'll make this real easy. All of them.
All
Okay.
of them?
So early season, I want to be as deep back in the back bays as possible in those sod banks with nice steep drop offs with a gradual shelf where they can come up to sun themselves when the water's cold. That's what I'm looking for the first, I don't know, 3 to 4 weeks. From that point, I'm looking for 10 to 12 feet of water on a nice drop off where there's bait around in the bays. So I'm moving. Okay. I get on my Navionics app on my phone and I'm looking for all the deeper pockets going closer to the inlets. So as July rolls around, like we just wrapped up July, we're into mid-August, but as July rolls around and the waters start to warm up, you find that the fish are going to start making their way towards the inlets to get out to the reefs and such. So I'm looking for those deeper holes that are adjacent or closer to inlets where they're going to kind of lay to rest on their way out. And then now it's all, and I actually made the transition out front sooner than I normally would, just simply because I wanted to hone my game. And then it's all out front from like mid-July on for me, inlets, working inlets, the edges of inlets. And I don't do the whole jetty rocks too much. That's not my game. I don't fish that heavy. It's a little bit different for me. I would be the guy fishing the other side of the jetty, that pocket on the inside from the beach.
Right.
That's where I would be tackling it. But
yeah, it's interesting. I haven't had great weeks the past couple of weeks in the back, and I've been going out a lot with a guy named John, and we have not been able to get out front because in the kayak, we could go in the surf, but we're focused on the kayak right now. And all we want to do is go out in front because we're sure that's where they are. And we're in the back and we're catching a whole bunch of shorts and it's just not quite doing it for us. And then, and the worst thing is you get home, you log in and you see social media and it's like 4.5 pounds. And there's John in the chat right now, John Creeley. Yeah. So he's,
the chat.
Yeah. But then you see the 4 and 5 pounders all being caught right in the surf, and we just can't get out. We can't get out there. And again, we could just keep the kayaks in the trucks, just go down to the beach and start walking the beach, looking for the structure and everything. But I guess the stubbornness, you're just trying to make it work whatever way we can, and it's just not panning out this year like it did last year. I think everything moved 2 to 3 weeks earlier than it did last year.
I would agree with that. So for me, I was doing the kayak thing early. My health, I struggle with some health stuff. So for me, it's easier just to say, okay, I'm gonna take a couple hours and go to the beach and see if I can catch some fish. And then if it turns into a little bit more than that, my health allows it, then I keep going. That's what it comes down to for me. But it's just a little bit easier right now for me to deal with a fishing trip on foot than it is on a kayak. So,
right.
Last year it was a lot of it was a lot of kayak for me. This year, I'm kind of having to rewind. My roots are on my feet. So I've been a bank beater, really doing really well on my feet up until last year. And, I've just kind of had to rewind and reassess and do some things because honestly, it's been a task to get out there as much as I would like on the kayak. So I'm just trying to make do. And, I've always been good with the single jig. I've always been good with jigging. And I just wanted to try and hone that game a little bit this year. So.
Well, it sounds like you have. And actually, that's a good chance for me to show everybody some of these pictures as we keep talking. You got to prove it, right? Pics or it didn't happen, right? So we got some pics that I'll add in here so that people can see.
That was down in Maryland. 4 fish. If you guys are seeing 4 fish there, that was in Maryland.
Yeah.
That was in October, a bay limit in October. I had 3 bay limits in October down in Maryland. So don't sleep on Maryland, guys.
Man, so there's just some beautiful fish in here, and what I really like is, for example, I could say, oh, I catch all these from shore, but no, there's actually proof here that you're catching them from shore because you have them laying on the sod, you have them laying on the grass, you have them laying on the beach, on the rocks, all that stuff. And there's some really nice fish in there. Even saw a winter flounder that's going to come through here in a little bit.
Yeah, we like those too. My son really likes going with me to fish for the winter flounder.
I remember back in the day, we used to go every year, and I mean, it was buckets of them if you wanted to keep them all, and we kept quite a lot, as everybody did back in the day.
Yeah,
man, can't find them anymore. It's so hard to find them, and it's disappointing. And I hate to say that because I'm part of the reason that they're difficult to find because we just fished and fished like crazy.
Sure.
Yeah, so these are some of the. So we actually did have a question in there from John Hutchinson. He was asking, when it comes to current and weight, how does that affect with a light jig head?
So John, when it comes down to the light jig head, I'm trying to always position myself to use the wind to my advantage. I always want the wind really at my back, but you have the other factor that's the current. So, there's really it really is very technique driven where you really gotta hone your skills because feeling the bottom, and working that tide, I try and work around where it's lesser tidal push and all that good stuff to keep my jig as close to the bottom as possible. But it's tough. You got to really pick your spots. And when I fish the way that I do, most days aren't perfect. I really got to pick my days. I'm looking for days with low tidal coefficient. So that's something I got into this year is really, diving into the details. That tidal coefficient really determines how much water is getting pushed over the course of a day, over the course of a tide. So if you can read that, then you realize, hey, guess what? There's going to be a lot of water pushing. The tide's going to be a stronger tide today. Maybe today's not the day. It really is just you're fishing the first about 20 yards in front of you. So you really just got to be able to tackle that water in front of you. Everybody that's casting way out, those people really they're missing the fish. You got to really, when you're fishing the surf, you got to locate the structure in the surf, which is going to be your sandbars. Sandbars is going to have openings within the sandbars where the fish will be feeding on those edges. And that's where you're going to find all these flatfish. There's all those troughs right on the edges of the sandbars.
And are you catching them at your feet at all?
I have. Yeah, I've had them like launch out of the water that close. Yeah, I've watched them come up over the lip and right into like an inch or two of water. So when I tell you, like, if you're picking the tides, I like to pick the higher tides when I'm fishing the beach, the beach lip. So I like to fish, the basically the second half of incoming tide there. But I've had my best luck recently on the outgoing, right when it switched. So.
Really, and let's talk about the structure then. What type of structure are you specifically? Now you said the sandbars, but what are you looking? What is the water looking like, and where are you tossing around the sandbars?
So right now, I mean, I'm gonna give out a secret here, and your best fishing tool is going to be your optics. You really, when you're fishing the beach, you got to be able to break down the water in front of you, see what the water's doing, see where it's going, see where it's pushing, and you're going to be looking for the funnels. Basically, I look for the funnels where it's pushing water like this. You have sandbars, water's going out here, coming in, and basically on these inflows right here is where the fish all sit because once the water flushes back in, that's where the bait is. It's bringing the bait in with it. So I've actually waded out on the corner of these sandbars and fished right at the edges and just picked fish after fish off like that. It's a lot of fun. You could do that. That's one thing you can do at the low tides to keep busy when the tide is low. Get out on those sandbars and fish the troughs on each side of that sandbar where the fish are schooled up feeding. But I like to fish those, and I like to fish the lip itself, that pronounced lip. Not all of our beaches in Jersey have it. You gotta really do your homework, but some of these beaches have that pronounced lip. You'll see it towards inlets and such. Townsend's Inlet's a good one, where you get this pronounced lip, and the fish really just push right up to the lip because all the bait sits right at that lip. That's where they get pushed and stopped right there. So you can literally toss right at the lip, and you'll catch fish that way all day. Just toss it there, like an inch.
Are you talking specifically like where the waves are breaking right onto the sand, right onto the beach?
So you have like where it cups, right? So it cups, the sand comes up. So right there on the inside of that cup, right below that.
Gotcha.
So the water might be coming up a little bit past that, depending on the tide, but that lip, that pronounced lip, is where they'll push up to, because that's where the bait gets pushed up to.
There's a lip there when a little kid walks in and all of a sudden he disappears.
Up here. It happened.
All of a sudden he's up to his neck.
It happened in front of me while I was fishing Townsend's when I was on vacation. A kid I was like, "Oh, no, don't go. That's deep right there." And his dad running over.
Yeah, you're reaching down and pulling them out. Yeah. I've seen that happen. There are actually some really nice beaches for those in New Jersey, up at the northern part of the state, mid to northern part, where the entire stretch of multiple towns in a row has a beautiful lip and trough that runs almost the entire length of it.
Absolutely. And to rewind real quick. So when I'm looking into the water, I'm looking for those darker holes. So you'll see the darker holes that are positioned around the sandbars, and that's where the fish will be sitting. So I'm tossing into those little darker holes. Whereas the water's getting shallower, you see the darker pockets of water. That's where the fish typically are sitting. That's where I've been finding them.
Gotcha. So I'm going to take us a little bit off track. North Wales Zoo has a question, but before I ask this question to you, you're probably reading it right now too, Dan, but do you ever use gulp?
Always. That's all I use.
That's all you use. Okay. So North Wales Zoo, keep getting gulp tails bitten off. Am I in a bed of shorts, or is my retriever or the hook off?
Let me rewind real quick again. I'm sorry. So when I say that's all I use, I've tried other things. I've tried, the Z-Man door matadors. I want them to work so bad because, they hold up so much better. They have great connection. I have some of the larger Z-Man jerk shads that I'm gonna put to use when I get on a good bite to see the difference. To see how the bite changes based off of what I'm using. That when you get down to it, when you're very technique driven, you start to get into all these little tests. You test your gear to see, okay, is this going to work now? I know I'm on a bite, and I'm going to toss this out there, or let's see if this keeps working. But as far as North Wales Zoo's question goes, chances are you are either on a couple of shorts that are on your baits, or maybe there's some smaller bluefish or even blowfish around. You see some of these blowfish in the bays, and people are harvesting them, and they're coming up with bellies full of gulp. Well, that's probably some of your gulp there. Some of my gulp and some of Rich's gulp. Gulp.
I always wondered what it is, and I always blame sea bass.
Yeah, sea bass too.
But I have an underwater camera, and I put it down a few times this year. Nick, North Wales Zoo is Nick. So there you go, Nick. But I put the underwater camera down a few times, and it takes a lot to do that, right? Because you're dropping a couple $100 down on the end of 15-pound braid, and you're fishing in sticky bottoms, right? So I was really getting annoyed though, because I'm dropping pack after pack of gulp, and I was amazed at how many northern puffer / blowfish were in the back bays. And I'm saying this as somebody who has fished South Jersey. I think I'm 48. My entire life, I've fished down there. I have never caught a blowfish. They are all over, and they come up and they just nip those tails. It's a blowfish when you have that perfect circular cut taken out of it. That's the blowfish, because they have almost like a parrot beak, right? So it comes down on it. And I was actually surprised at how few sea bass there were. Now the sea bass though, they'll shred it in a second. But the puffers, they usually take perfect little shapes out of the tail. So that if you're seeing that, I would say it's probably a puffer fish. If you're seeing it just ripped off, that might be the sea bass. It could be a short. But I haven't seen shorts taking too many tails off of things on video. They typically don't rip the thing off, even though they have the teeth. They're not like the sea bass.
No, you usually get those drag marks, and you're like, man, I just missed one.
Yeah.
Just missed one. Yeah, you get the drag marks from the fluke usually. But yeah, it's probably sea bass, crabs, bluefish, or blowfish. Those are going to be your culprits, I would say. Probably
Yeah.
the bluefish and the little bluefish more than anything else. But
If it's an inlet right now, I can tell you it's going to be bluefish.
yep.
Just by the couple of inlets I've been in the past month, they are just, I mean, absolutely stacked with cocktail blues. It's actually the most bluefish I've seen. It's real small. I mean, I'm talking like the little guys. I have not seen that many in 10, 15 years at all coming through those inlets. Like Hereford was ridiculous with the, I mean, talk about a blitz that went on for 3 hours straight. It was so bad that the seagulls were just sitting in the middle of the blitz, and more seagulls were coming over and eating, and they were just getting so full they just sat down. So I'm guessing it's probably the little bluefish that are pulling them off. But back to the so you're fishing the darker areas that you're seeing off the beach. You're looking for that lip. What are you looking for when you're fishing in the back? Is that where you go to Navionics?
When I'm fishing in the back, I do cheat. I will look at my Navionics to kind of get an idea of the terrain, the kind of deep areas. It really depends on the part of the season, right? So early season, we'll say like that first 2 weeks of June, you're probably going to find fish that are in, water from 20 feet to 2 feet. So you really got to find areas that are going to present all of that in one location. So you want to have, drop offs where it's kind of steep, but quick drop offs. I have a spot that I've done well at for years where it's literally you wade out to about your waist and it's 10 feet down, and I just walk back and forth in vertical jig right there, and then I cast out. So sometimes they'll come right up to the edge of that structure there and just feed right there because the bait's sitting right there. And then sometimes I'm catching them out in 10 to 12 feet of water. So, but as the season progresses, I'm looking for 30 feet of water closer to inlets, like late July, early August, I'm looking probably 25, 30 feet of water holes closer to inlets. So you look at some of these South Jersey shore towns, there's not a whole lot of those holes around. So you kind of get an idea where I'll be fishing if you look for those kinds of things.
Yeah. And be honest, how many of your friends have you not told about that 10-foot drop off?
Oh, I've taken my friends there and haven't told them that it's there.
Let them get a little wet.
No. I mean, I won't let them walk out that far. Because they are like, this is good here, but I don't tell them it's there to fish it. I won't let them fall off it though. I didn't like where you're going with that. Yeah, because I'll be honest with you, man. I've caught so many fish right below that drop. It's incredible. So I don't tell anybody about it.
Yeah, you got to keep some things, to yourself. There's the I like to say the time on the water isn't really the most important thing, but it is time on the water where you find these things, because you're not going to see that necessarily on Navionics. Maybe you do, but most likely you won't. The one thing that people need to understand about Navionics is it's not made really for us. It's made for boats. It's made for boat captains that are looking for channels, the intercoastal. And a lot of these wadeable areas, a lot of these areas in the back for, that you can get to in a kayak or a flats boat, they're not even marked. They show 1 foot. Well, it's showing 1 foot, but I'm sitting on top of a 16-foot hole, in the middle of what is not 1 foot, but is a 4-foot flat. So it's a lot of, I think people need to realize that, in the back, that you can still find good areas, but sometimes the best are just hidden, and you do have to go and look for them and experiment and check around.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you find your best spots when it's a blowout tide and you're having the worst day ever, around a full moon. You see structure that you can come back to at another time. So,
and that's the great thing. I mean, if you're ever bored and you're in one of these shore towns or areas and it's low tide, just look around and open your eyes and look at and even though you can't see the bottom, you'll see eddies, you'll see upwelling, and it'll look out of place. You'll see a seam of water where there shouldn't be a seam of water, and there's some structure there, and it's worth checking out. So, look for the differences, the changes in the water and the seams, and that can sometimes indicate something that nobody else is going to see once that tide comes up a couple more feet.
Absolutely. And we talk about Townsend's, that place, for example. You go there one week and it's completely different the next week. So that's just a perfect example of learning learning where you're going to fish and making sure you do your homework. Because, you could show up someplace that you fished, last year a lot, and it's going to be completely different this year. It's going to be new structure that's going to be cut in a little bit different. Mother Nature's going to do what she wants with it. So.
Yeah, and it's amazing how little time it takes to move a 40-foot hole a quarter of a mile.
Yeah.
There's still likely going to be another 40-foot hole, even if yours disappears, but you got to go find it again because it's just going to shift and it's just going to move. And you can do that. I mean, you can do that from shore. You don't need a fish finder. You just need to be aware of how the angle that your line is going down, and when you're expecting it to hit the bottom and it's not, just keep letting it go, and then you'll get a sense of where that structure is, and just bounce it along. So have you noticed though any general conditions that you prefer to be out fishing from shore?
Listen, we all like a nice westerly wind and nice clean water, and we all like those perfect conditions. But I'm a dad. I work a lot of crazy hours. I'm married. I try and tackle the conditions that are ahead of me. If it seems doable, then I feel confident enough that I can make something work. There's plenty of times where I come back cursing myself, saying, "What the heck was I thinking? That didn't work at all." But hey, listen, you take the time you get, right?
Yeah, that's how I am. I typically want one day a week.
Yeah, but with fishing, I've found that the nicer condition days, I haven't had great luck on your lower level weather days. I've caught them in the rain. Don't get me wrong. I got stuck in the rain, 4 miles down the beach one time this year, and I was just wailing on them, all shorts, but I must have caught like 40 fish in the rain, just going nuts. And it was simply because I didn't have anywhere else to go. I was 4 miles away from where I was parked. Am I going to walk all the way back and still be wet, or am I going to just fish and be wet?
Right.
So,
well, and there's nothing wrong with catching 40 shorts. I mean, you can only catch what's there.
Yeah.
Yep. At least that's the way that I look at it. So now let's talk about, so we have some structure that, to look for: the drop offs in the back, the lips, the runouts, the troughs, the sandbars. So how are you presenting? What are your tactics for actually presenting that lure to the fish?
So basically I'm working. So let's say the tide's going, left to right here. So I'm tossing way up current if I can, and letting the current allow my light jig, to dig my jig down, and use that to my advantage. And then my cadence is it's very pronounced. It's just, once I've hit the bottom, it's 2 pops and then a drag back to me, and then I reel up, back down, and it's 2 pops, and then I drag it back. Usually when I'm dragging it back is when I get that hit out front. I do it a little bit different in the back. I just do 3 pops and let it sit, and bring it back. It's very, my cadence is very deliberate though. It's not, sometimes I'll speed it up, but it's really deliberate. I just do, and then drag it back, reel up, reel down, bang, and then back through it.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's similar to how I fish for weak fish, with the more deliberate.
Yeah.
In the back with the flounder, I don't really do the Skinner thing where, I don't have the forearms for it. It's just a continuous. It doesn't seem right to me.
Never had luck doing that. I feel like you probably missed some of the lazier ones, and some of those lazier ones are the big fat ones waiting for the perfect meal to come by.
Yeah,
you're going to get all those aggressive ones anyway, right? So why? That technique hasn't worked for me. It works for him. Perfect.
Yeah, it definitely works for him. My buddy Billy swears by it. You look at, I don't know if you've seen his channel, B-Stab Fishing. He swears by it. I will do it, but I typically seem to get the hits. I'll do it, and then I'll stop, and then I'll just do little twitches, and then I'll just do slow, and then I'll do the lift and sit for a second, not on the bottom, but just an inch or 2 off the bottom, and that's when I tend to get the hits. It's almost like they get interested in the rapid, but when it's sitting, that's when I'm getting them.
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever seen the way these jerk shads work in the water, I mean, you really don't have to do a whole lot to them, especially when you're fishing that light. I mean, you have a lot of water that's moving around there, and you can really get a lot of bang for your buck out of just a short little jig like that.
Yeah.
I do it a little bit more pronounced than that, but I switch it up. I'll do a couple little light ones like this and just bang one big one, and usually that big one is really gets them excited, but. You got to switch it up a little bit, but for the most part, it's pretty pronounced, pretty slow, pretty deliberate, and it's worked for me. Now, I've seen other people doing it right next to me, doing quicker retrieve, and they're still catching fish.
Right.
So it's a one size fits all type thing.
Right. Now, when you're out of spot, how are you working the spot in general? Are you doing a fan pattern, or are you just generally trying to keep a narrow or do you hit one area heavy, or do you just fan out and just keep going back and forth until you think you've played it out?
Well, if there's no like distinct structure that I'm working, I'm going to do the fan. I'm going to go all the way through and then back through, and then sometimes I'll go all the way through and go back this way. I the fan cast it, and that's one of the things about fishing from shore that I like, because you can really destroy the piece of water that's in front of you. You can really, if you want to pick that water apart, with lethal technique, you really can. It's just up to you if you want to spend that much time doing it. Whereas if you're in a kayak, you're in a boat, you're vertical jigging, you're missing 4 feet pieces of water at a time, if dependent upon your cadence. I just think you have the better ability to break down the water in front of you. You're just limited to that spot when you're fishing on foot. So
yeah, I 100% agree. It's so frustrating.
Yeah,
there should be fish,
yeah,
and they're not.
Yeah,
they're probably 2 feet away.
Well, and when you do well, from shore, and you got all these boat guys that are mugging you, right? And then you see the frustration, and it's like, it's completely different ball game here. We're both fishing for the same thing, but we're both doing it very differently. So you can't compare what you're doing out there to what I'm doing in here. It's not the same technique. And sometimes technique is everything, right? So
yeah, I think it is everything. Now let's talk about what I think is one of the more debated techniques for flounder fishing, the hook set. How are you doing the hook set? So you're fishing artificials. Are you the wait 9 seconds and slam it, or are you just the slam right away?
So it's changed, right? So when you're fishing these light jigs, they suck them in so easily that they can kind of get a feel for how that it's not real pretty quickly, and you're not getting a second chance a lot of times. When you're fishing a heavier jig, you tend to get a little bit more of an opportunity because it sits there and it's gullet a little bit longer. It's math, right? So when you're fishing these lighter jigs, the first chance you get, like once you've reeled up all your line, go nuts. That's what I do. I don't wait. I found, when I'm fishing as light as I do, as soon as I can get all my line reeled up, that's when I'm hitting it home.
Yeah, it's I've had people make fun of me because I tend to slam it quick.
Yeah.
But you have to. It's not live bait. It's not even cut bait. They're going to know it's not a gulp for all of its magic, and it is truly a magical soft plastic. But man, the second it's in their mouth, they know it's not real. And you have that short period of time. Now, it doesn't mean they won't come back at it, right? If you pull it out of their mouth, they might come back at it. But
yeah.
I try to slam it home every time, and I try to jam it right through the bone, right into the hinge of their mouth, or right in the narrowest part on the bottom. But I don't subscribe to that, sit back, light a cigarette, have a beer, then come back and then think about sending. No, that's not how it works.
No, the moment I get all my line reeled up is when I hit it home. And listen, I miss fish, but I tag more of them than I don't. So I do all right for myself. Like I'm okay with missing fish if that's what makes the most sense for me. So
right, and everyone's going to miss that fish that picks it up when it's coming towards you.
Yeah,
you don't even know it's been picked up.
Yep.
So let's talk real quick. What's your personal best flounder from shore?
My personal best flounder from shore is the same as it is from a boat. I have two of them at 26.5 inches, 6.5 pounds. That's my PB, both from shore. I got two of them in 2018, the same size.
That's awesome. That's some nice fish, especially from shore.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, you're not getting the chances at the larger fish when you're on foot as much as you would at the the moderate level fish. And I'm okay with that because, while I want to catch a big fish, if I'm harvesting flounder, I don't want those big ones anyway. I want to take home, the smaller keepers for my family, because I want to at least give a chance to a female breeding fish to go back.
Right. That's actually a pretty good segue. So we've gone through the gear, the spots, the tactics. Actually, before I jump into this next thing, let's just check for questions. What rods do you like for jigging? So what brands do you use?
So when I'm jigging out front, my rod of choice currently is a Shimano Intenza 7-foot rod. It's really a bass rod. It's rated to 5/8 ounce medium. Extra fast tip. That extra fast tip is the ticket out front because you want to get as much action out of your jig as possible. You want the tip and the current to do the work, not anybody else, not anything else. So when I'm in the back, I'm using a St. Croix Avid Inshore, which you saw laying down in a lot of those pictures. It's a little bit of a more stout rod. It's going to have a fast action tip. And that rod has caught me probably more flounder than any other rod I've ever used. So
it's a pretty good endorsement.
Yeah. So, yeah. I like the really light rod out front and the little bit heavier rod for some of that stickier structure I'm fishing. Makes
sense. All right. So with that, I want to roll into a topic that I know is really important to you. And I stole this from your Instagram. It's one of your videos. And I just want people to see, before you talk about anything conservation or anything like that, I want everyone to see what you actually did and have proof of. So let me just throw this up here real quick. All right, so that's well over 20 inches, right? Hold on one sec. Hold on. The thing is muting you. Hold on.
Here I am.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's so tough when you try to do all of this stuff at once over 3 monitors, but it actually mutes us when and I couldn't pull you off of there. But that was over 20 inches, right?
Yeah, it was a good fish. I am of the belief that you don't need to keep all of them, and flounder is one of those fish, right, that you don't see go back too often when they're a legal fish. I've made it a point, back in 2018 when I got really into flounder fishing, I was saying, I want my limit every time. Yes, this is great. And, as I'm getting older and I'm seeing like the patterns of these fish moving more north, and I see my kids getting older, and I see them having less opportunities than even I have right now. And I already feel like I have less opportunities than, people before us. I'm trying to make the efforts that I can on my end to kind of be more conservation minded and, kind of really, put my money where my mouth is. So I think I'm at 37 legal flounder so far this year. And I've released 21 of them.
That's pretty impressive. I mean, like you said, you don't see that very often. I tend to keep a bunch. You don't like fish though, do you?
No, but my flounder's my family's favorite fish to eat. So, I am at this crossroads, like feed my family, be conservation minded, feed my family. So I do, I try to do it the right way. Like the last time I was out, last Monday, a week ago today, I caught a limited flounder. It's the first, I caught a limited flounder. It's the first time I've ever caught I almost caught a quadruple limit that day. I caught 5 fish over 20 inches. I released 4 fish over 20 inches that day, up to 23.5 inches. and I kept like the smaller end of the keepers. So I had like 2 19s and a 20 that I kept.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. I got to say, no matter how much it hurts you, when you release a fish like that and you see that thing swim away, it's a good feeling after.
Yeah. Listen, for me, if I had it my way, every fish I ever caught would go back. But right. I also have, the responsibility of feeding my family and, not buying fish. Right. This hobby for us, this passion for us is already expensive enough. You may as well get a little bit of a kickback and get some fish out of it, right?
Yeah, I definitely believe that. I live in Pennsylvania, so in a lot of these places, if I go to North Jersey, it's going to take me about an hour, 15 minutes to an hour and a half. If I go to South Jersey, it's like 2.5 hours. In the summer, on a Saturday, or actually on a Sunday on the way home, it could take 3.5, 4 hours to get home. Yeah, so man. I'm spending, $150 just in tolls and gas, some days to get down to these places. So yeah, it's nice to keep some fish, but I typically, I won't keep anything more than we'll eat in a week, and it's usually 2 fish, and I'll start throwing them back. I'll get rid of some of the larger ones. I do really like the 18 to 20. It is nice to get a big one every once in a while, but it was great. Last year, I did have a really good year, and I was returning 24-inch plus routinely because I had 3 18s. I kept my limit, but, I'm letting some really nice fish go, and that felt pretty good.
Yeah, I'll take 3 18s over 3 20s every day of the week for sure. When it comes down to it, I'll even go down to Delaware and Maryland to fish in Virginia sometimes because they have that little smaller limit. So I have at least a little bit more of an opportunity to release, a female fish potentially over a male fish. A 16 and a half fish, while it's getting close as my son's getting older and older and eating a little bit more, it's getting closer. But a 16 and a half fish, half-inch fish still feeds my family when I quarter it. So
yeah,
one fish is a meal. I'm never in a position where I need more than that. If I'm ever out there looking for food, that's not the way to do it. I say this all the time. Like if you're fishing for food, this is not the cheapest way to do it ever.
No, there are much better ways to do it.
Yeah,
much better ways. So I'm going to guess that you're not the biggest fan of the flounder gigging.
No, not my thing. But hey, to each their own. Listen, I have some friends down south that do it, and I would go on a trip just to see what it's like, to experience it once, and that would be it for me. It's not gigging isn't. I mean, I don't even think our fishery up here really lends itself to it, but no. I know there's people south, like in Virginia, and friends of mine that do it down there in North Carolina. They really dig it. So it's something I wouldn't mind experiencing once, but it's not for me. I don't like having my chances of releasing a fish go to 0.
Right. And it's a whole different thing. And I don't think I don't begrudge anyone who wants to gig a flounder. If it's legal, I'm good with it.
Sure.
I may disagree with it, but I'm never going to argue with somebody their right to do it. It's not for me though. For me, it's more about, can I even find a fish?
Yeah.
And then I don't care so much about the size. The only reason I care about the size of the fish is I can't make a good video with a bunch of 14s. Well, so at least one good one in there.
Rich. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's all fun because I don't really eat fish, so it's all fun to me. I don't really get stressed out about sizes of fish. I'll have when we have our different little people trolling us, they'll be like, "Oh, you catch the smallest fish, so what? I don't care." I catch big fish, I catch small fish. It's just all about the chase for me. And, it's one of those things where, I understand the people that are doing it for food. They want to catch the biggest fish, bring the biggest amount of meat home and all that good stuff. So it's to each their own. The gigging thing, if it's legal, then by all means, if it's legal, you're not doing anything wrong, go for it.
Yeah, that's how I feel. And if you don't like it, then speak up at the meetings, go to the meetings. That's the one thing fishermen are really good at. Myself included, will complain really loudly because of these limits are wrong and these restrictions are wrong, but none of us show up for the meetings. The striped bass meetings, people are up in arms, and even the flounder, and where they had 12 people show up to the one thing, and they had like 50 commercial guys show up, and you're never going to get your voice heard that way. And I think it's like, if you don't vote in an election, don't complain.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I have one more question, unless somebody wants to sneak a question into the chat real quick before we go. So this is something that I had asked Qua in the thing. So let's say God just reached out to you and said, hey, you know what? You're not allowed to target flounder for this next year, but you're required to go fishing every single day. What are you going to target?
If I was required to go fishing every single day and I wasn't allowed to target flounder, does it have to be a local species?
Doesn't have to be
anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world?
Yep.
I'd probably have to go with like snook or tarpon, something like that.
Yeah.
Something that would just beat my butt up every single day.
And have you caught either before?
No. They're both on my list.
Yeah, me too. I think it's on a lot of people's lists, especially in the Mid-Atlantic and North.
If it was something I had caught already, and I had to pick one thing, maybe a smallmouth bass, because they're fun, and you get different potential if you fly fish for them or do this or that. So then you have topwater opportunities, subsurface. So if I had to pick one locally, probably smallmouth, which I really enjoyed getting into this year. And then, if I had to pick one fish, maybe probably a tarpon or snook.
Yeah, man, that would be awesome. I wish I had boated, landed, hooked, even seen. I've never seen either of the two live. So
hey, they're going to be in our backyard before we know it. They're already here. So.
You had mentioned it's the flounder pushing north. I'm 100% with you. This fishery is not the same as it was in the 70s. It's not the same as the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. It's not the same as it was 5 years ago.
I was going to say
everything's north.
5 years ago, it's all changing. Everything's moving north. But on the flip side, we're getting some of these other southern fisheries that we may not have been introduced to. So, I guess we'll see how it all plays out, right?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm already looking quite often for redfish. I know they're here. I just haven't found them yet. There's not enough to make it easy yet. I'm looking for the redfish and the specks. I will tell you, since this is a live stream, this is not exactly on the topic. I want everybody to know that John and I were fishing last weekend on Saturday, right before the storm came in. The amount of weak fish, small, the small weak fish in the back, maybe 10 to 13 inches, it was amazing. They were all over the backwaters. There were so many of them that there were 15 porpoises feeding on the schools, which was so disappointing. We protect those things that are devastating the weak fish, but everybody loves dolphins and porpoises. But I mean, they were all over. I mean, it was obvious that that's what they were. John and I both pulled them up, and the second you're dropping down, they're hitting everything pink. I mean, they were going bananas. And then the porpoises came rolling through, 15 of them actively feeding, hurting the schools. So the good and the bad. The bad is this kind of confirms that it is the porpoises that are killing most of the weak fish, that and the spiny dogfish. But the good news is I haven't seen schools of weak fish like that in decades. I mean, since the 80s. So there's some good news. If you want to get on some weak fish and, in the next couple of years, maybe they're making that comeback now. The population grew for the first time in the past 5 or 10 years, actually, I think last year. Hopefully we got another year. We're going to get a little bit better recruitment.
Yeah, usually when I'm out fishing for them at night and I hear the dolphins show up, that's usually when I pack it up for the night.
Yeah. I mean, they just devastate them and quick.
Yeah, a couple of my spots that I fish for them at night, like they're pretty well lit, and you see the dolphins come in, you're like, there we go. And it's usually like right after you show up, you get on a fish or two, and it's like over that quick.
Yeah, that's kind of how it was for us. We were targeting Fluke. We were purposefully trying to avoid the weak fish. But man, it was, the only reason we stayed there was because we figured there were so many weak fish that the porpoises wouldn't be focusing on any fluke that were in the area. So we just kept trying anyway. It's just shorts though that we were able to pull in though. So you want to let everyone know where to find you and let everyone know what the next Tide Chasers podcast is all about.
Well, Rich, it's been an absolute pleasure, hopping on here with you. You were a guest on Tide Chasers, and it was beyond a pleasure to return the favor and be a guest with you. Flounder's one of my things, so it's been fun, really a lot of fun chatting about it. But my Instagram is D Mancari, DMANCARI 18. And then we're at Tide Chasers Podcast on Facebook, and it's at Tide_Chasers on Instagram. Basically, we're doing weekly podcasts with, your local charter captains, your local tackle shop owners, guys like Rich, local talent, local fishing talent. And we're bringing everybody together and just talking fishing, man. There's a big hole in this area as far as this kind of content, because there's not consistent content and there's not a lot of good content. So there was a little bit of a niche that we were hoping to fill, and so far so good, man. We've had some incredible guests, and we've had a lot of amazing feedback, and we have a lot of other people that are trying to come on with us, and it's been great. We can't complain. We just had Dave from I Strike Fishing on this past week. Had a big announcement with adding sheep's head to the Release Over 20 initiative, which for us is like a huge accomplishment, right? Because we're fighting for these fish that we think it's important. And now Dave, with his Release Over 20 initiative, is going to reward people for releasing those bigger fish. So if we can't get the regulations right away, that's a step in the right direction. If it saves one fish, two fish, 5 fish, it's helping.
So there you have it. Dan is one of those anglers that I really respect and I love to talk to. As you heard, he's not only passionate about fishing, but he also puts in a lot of time, effort, and thought before hitting the water. Since this conversation, he's continued to land quality fluke from shore, and if you take some of his advice, I'm pretty sure you're going to find some improvements in your game as well. Now, before I go, if you're not already following or subscribed to this podcast, that would be greatly appreciated, and of course, a positive review on any of the platforms that you listen to it on would also be greatly appreciated, because that helps us to grow the podcast and draw more guests. So until next week, until next episode, get out there, get on the water, and get some tight lines.